Thank you, Rolf. So, as Rob said, I'm Tom Fisher. I'm at the University of Minnesota. Used to be the dean of the College of Design. I now direct the Minnesota Design Center. In my sort of a previous career I was the historical architect for the State Historic Preservation Office in Connecticut. So early part of my career, I was heavily involved in preservation activities, and of course still value preservation, not only for its historical value, as we've heard, but also for its environmental value, as we heard. The greenest building is the building that we already have and that we reuse rather than tear down. And also, just in the School of Architecture, I mean, as I've looked at what the school is proposing, it's just a really bad building that they're proposing. I mean, not only are they proposing to tear down the church, but they're proposing to put a blank wall gymnasium on the street. So they're turning their back to this neighborhood. They're putting their back end to you. And I think it's outrageous. I mean, I don't know who the architect is, but it's a crummy architect. I mean, it's simply bad. So I think there are many reasons that we have got to look for a win-win solution. So, there's a great team doing the historic preservation analysis, and I thought what I maybe could contribute. I can't sort of, I can't compare to what they're doing. So I was looking for win-win solutions, as Roy said, that tried to look at what is the school trying to achieve, and how can we save the church and help them also achieve their goals? Because I think we all still want the school to be successful, right? And one of the ironies of this, and I'll just, as a kind of aside, so Rolf mentioned all of the different brick bonds in the building. Now, one of the characteristics of Romanesque architecture, these were buildings that were built over long periods of time, sometimes hundreds and hundreds of years. And the reason why they had all these different kinds of brick was that different generations of people would keep adding to the building. So I would argue that what we need to do is to have that same mentality today. Instead of tearing the building down, is figure out a way to add to it. Just one more set of brick bonds that we add to some other part of the site that adds to the building, keeps the building the way it is, and keeps the spirit of Hausler's vision of a building that is added to over time. I've spoken with the leadership of the school, and I sort of took two directions. I should say, by the way, that you're fortunate to have Brian Tempest. Brian's in the back of the room with Cunningham Architects. Cunningham is one of the leading firms in the country around educational facilities. They've done some of the most innovative educational facilities in the country here in Minnesota and elsewhere. And so one of my approaches with the school was to talk about how this building, St. Andrews, is a huge asset for them. Because one of the things that struck me is they view it as a problem. They view it as somehow a challenge, a deficit. And so I talked to them about how, particularly in the charter school world, you want to create something that's unique, identifiable, and memorable, right? And so there they have this enormous asset of this great building that's connected, obviously, as we've heard, not just to Hungarian culture, but to German culture. So rather than see it as a problem, what can we do with that asset? One of the other things I talked about, and Brian's firm knows quite a bit about this, is that education is moving away from standard classrooms to much larger, flexible spaces. And I talked to them about the fact that actually this big space of the former nave of the church is really the kinds of educational spaces that a lot of schools are trying to build right now, and they already have one. They have a large, flexible space that they could, in fact, use for the new kind of ways in which education is happening. I also talked to them about the fact that a charter school has to be connected to and responsive to the community. And somehow tearing down this building is the worst thing they could do in terms of relationships to their community. And then finally, and I think you'll see this if you look at their website, they're concerned about costs, they're concerned about affordability. And I can tell you that keeping an existing building and renovating it and working with it is much less expensive than what they're planning on doing, which is tearing it down and building a whole new building. in its place. And so, I was trying to encourage them to see that there are many different ways that you can do this. One of the things we talked about, and they actually seemed open to this, is some of you, I live over in St. Anthony Park, sort of on the other side of the campus, and you probably are aware of the reuse of a church on Cleveland and Buford Avenue by the Emily program. Now, that was an existing church, empty, and I actually think they've done a pretty good job of renovating that building. Now, it's granted they put another floor in, so it's no longer the large central space that it had, but actually I think from a preservation and actually from an environmental point of view, they didn't tear that building down. The exterior of the building has been preserved, and the interior was pretty well done. And actually, I think in my conversations with Ted, the school seemed interested in that as, a possibility. So one of the other things I did was just to simply look at the site and to look at what they were trying to achieve. And another bit of work we're doing in my center at the university, which is in some ways completely unrelated to this, but actually has bearing on it, is that we just received a big National Science Foundation grant because we're doing research on autonomous vehicles. And whatever you think about autonomous vehicles, they're going to be a part of our life in the next decade. But one of the things that's significant about them is that they're going to really dramatically reduce the need for parking. So I started to look at, what is the parking on this site? And there's, of course, as you know, there's a parking lot next to the church. And so I started to talk to them about, instead of tearing the church down, how could they find a way to accommodate their need for a gymnasium and need for additional offices and classrooms on top of or in lieu of that parking lot. And so we talked about a number of options. One option would be to keep the parking lot the way it is and simply put another layer above the parking lot, which would be some sort of recreational facility, right? We also talked, actually, and this is a point Rob made to me earlier on, another idea would be to simply add another floor onto the school wing that they have. They already, another highly expensive thing of a building is the foundations and the structure. And from what I can tell from that building, it can take another floor. And so, another option would be to not expand the footprint of the building, but simply go up. What was interesting to me as I talked to Ted is that a lot of these things they hadn't actually thought about. It seems to me, whoever their architect is that they seem pretty determined to get rid of the church. So I think one of the opportunities here for the community, particularly if you can hold on the demolition, is to engage them in a conversation about many more options. And again, between the preservationists in the room and the architects in this room, who I think are quite familiar with what educational facilities are doing, I think there's a real opportunity here and some door that's still open to say, look, there are other options for you to meet your needs, to keep the church. You may need to put something above your parking lot. Those kinds of things, I think, are, if the community is open to that and willing to kind of meet them halfway, I think there are ways that they can add to this facility without damaging the church. There may be the need, and they seemed open to this, that in fact this was what we were talking about, the Emily program. They said, well, what about putting in another floor in the church? Well, I said that might not be the ideal. It might be easier to keep the existing nave open as used as a gymnasium and add another floor on top of the classroom wing. But it seems to me that, I don't know how you feel, I think I would prefer to keep the church even if it meant a more dramatic interior change of the sort that the Emily program did, and inserting a level of, within the shell of the church. Wouldn't be my first option, but it would seem to me to be one option that could also be designed in a way that you could keep the, some of the stained glass windows. Maybe it could be designed in a way that in the future it could be taken out again. So there are ways to do it, I think, that would preserve certainly the exterior of the building, if not all of the interior features. Because they seem to be really concerned about the balcony and some of the other stairs up to the balcony. And I said, well, don't assume that this building will always have a balcony. Maybe there's another way that you can think about the interior of the church And those issues that you might be concerned about, thinking about simply as a traditional church, may not be necessary. So I would, to my mind, I think there's a lot of still opportunities here. I think one of the things I found, and I'd certainly be happy to help with this, would be for maybe a group of us who are professionals, practitioners, knowledgeable about preservation and reuse, meet with their architects as well as with the school, and begin to sort of say, look at peer-to-peer, professional to professional, what are other ways that we can meet the school's need and keep the church, and more creatively think about other options, because I don't think they've done that yet. So I think that's all I'll say. I mean, I and my center and the university is here to help, and we're happy to stay involved in this. And again, there are lots of talented people here in our midst, so happy to help. Yes?
Has anyone done any renderings, architectural renderings, modeling on the inside to present the ideas to them, or is it just all verbal at this point?
Well, I actually did some site plans and other kinds of things for them. I didn't spend a lot of time on that, but we possibly could do that. I actually think you'd be a little shocked at what this plan is going to look like in your neighborhood. I mean, to put a blank wall gymnasium up against the street is like the worst thing you can do, I think. So yeah, I think that would be, I mean, I don't know, Brian, I don't want to volunteer you, but we do have, and Rolf and Rob, but it seems to me that among all of us who are preservationists and architects, and that I think we could have a conversation with their design team, and I think we could come up with some more creative solutions than what they've done. Okay, great. Keep going. You're on the right track.